This is Pandora, my 1,000-gallon cloud rainforest vivarium, a tropical ecosystem within glass. Its purpose is to observe and study the workings of a wild ecosystem, particularly that of a lush and humid montane jungle, documenting its epic stories along the way. But Pandora is about to get a whole lot bigger. The idea of creating a second giant vivarium, an ecological extension to Pandora, connected by a glass bridge, has been creeping into my consciousness. And so, I've begun the research by visiting different biomes, a tropical cave, a misty swamp, a lowland rainforest, a treetop canopy, and grassy plains to find out what kinds of life exist in each, and decide what biome type and beasts I'd like to house for our second giant ecosystem vivarium. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of my Ecosystem Vivarium series, where we attempt to recreate a slice of Mother Nature within glass. Here on the AntsCanada Ant Channel. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC family. Enjoy. I began my search for our next vivarium by flying to the tropical Southeast Asian island of Borneo. Of all the natural spaces I've ever visited in the world, Borneo has by far proven to be one of the most biodiverse and mind-blowing, as you too are about to discover. Now, when most people think of tropical rainforests, the Amazon basin or the African Congo are usually the first to come to mind. But few people know that the Bornean rainforest is over twice as old as the Amazon and over 150 million years older than the Congo, as one of the world's last great bastions of biodiversity, with over 400 square meters of rainforest divided between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. On the third largest island on the planet, the number of unique species of plants, trees, mammals, reptiles, insects, and birds in Borneo is immense. And it was here where I decided to begin my study for our next ecosystem vivarium. After flying over acres of cloud rainforest, much like our Pandora, we landed in Sandakan, Malaysia to enter the famous Gomantong Caves and check out all the crazy things I spotted. The moment I entered the cave entrance, all I could smell was the sharp stench of ammonia. The swiftlets, which were flying all around above, were pooping onto the floor, which was rotting, and the smell made me dizzy. In this cave, swiftlets, a type of bird, were creating their signature saliva nests, the main constituent in bird's nest soup, which, as I learned from our guide, was now illegal to collect in this cave due to its negative impact to the swiftlet populations. Anyway, see all those little droplets falling from above? That's swiftlet poop. And as it rots on the cave floor, it turns black, forming this guano, which happens to be super rich in nutrients. I also spotted a little shallow stream with tiny land crabs and a giant millipede. On the cave walls, I spotted this huge 5-inch centipede that apparently preyed on swiftlet babies. Up high at this skylight opening, an orangutan was on the move. We'd be going up there soon. Of course, there were also a ton of sleeping bats everywhere. As I looked closer at the swiftlet guano, I could see tons of roaches eating up the edibles from the guano. And in fact, in these caves, roaches were rampant. They were literally everywhere. It blew my mind how roach-infested the caves were. I learned pretty quickly not to grab the wooden handrails in the dark. It made me realize how important roaches were in this particular cave ecosystem. Now, AC family, brace yourselves, because what I spotted next broke my heart. A baby swiftlet had just fallen from a nest above. It struggled to move in the guano. Sadly, according to the guide, as much as every part of me wanted to help it, the best course of action was to not interfere with nature and leave it be, as this baby bird would become essential food for predatory animals. It was a stark reminder that not all aspects of nature are beautiful and heartwarming. It sometimes can be harsh. But walking through Gomantong gave me a pretty good idea of how I might want to design and build a cave ecosystem vivarium if we ever went that route. The cave environment was cooler, super humid, with some water trickling around everywhere, a ton of insects and predators, and not too many plants. If we were to create a cave ecosystem vivarium, I would want it to have 1 or 2 skylights to allow sunlight to enter the habitat, lots of cool rock formations, stalactites, stalagmites, possibly even limestone or crystal formations, even a water feature of some sort, but nothing too crazy. If we were to add plants, they would probably have to be at the cave openings, if ever. But for me, the true beauty of caves is the hardscape, i.e. the formations of the rocks, and all the neat spaces and niches the animals living in the cave could occupy. I imagine the incredible cave ambiance possibilities in my mind. Can you guys imagine a cave ecosystem within a massive tank? In terms of creatures, we could house some pretty neat animals. Crabs, giant centipedes, cave-dwelling newts, and toads would work. I know a handful of ant species that would also love a cave environment. I would also love to find a whip spider, famous cave-dwelling arachnids. There are other bioluminescent creatures that inhabit caves, but realistically, I don't know where to source them. But wouldn't that be neat to see these? Now let's talk mammals. I feel a cave would make an excellent natural habitat for mice. Now about bats. Obviously, a vivarium enclosed by glass is not enough space for bats. But there are bats in my area. A ton of them, in fact. I see them swarming above my pool every dusk as they hunt for insects. I wonder if there was a way to connect a cave vivarium to the outside of my home through a window and somehow get the bats to come into our cave to sleep during the day. Wouldn't that just be epic? Just daydreaming out loud now. Anyway, what I did like about the cave concept was that it could also provide a refugium for prey insects. What's a refugium? Well, it's like an area that animals could seek refuge, hide away, and/or breed, protected from unfavorable conditions or from predators. A cave with an abundance of secret crevices and tunnels would be a perfect refugium for prey animals, like roaches and crickets, that could hide from predators and keep proliferating in a cooler space. Because guys, before we continue on, there's a serious issue I need to address about Pandora. It's been hot, scorching hot in my area, and Pandora's ambient temperatures are designed to be 3 or 4 degrees Celsius lower than outside temperatures where I live. By the way, in case you're new, I'm now living in the Southeast Asian tropics, where it's currently the hottest month of our year. Have a look at the tropical forest in my yard. This past week, it got to a whopping 47 degrees Celsius, which is 116.6 Fahrenheit. Super hot. And it has led to much of the vegetation drying up. This forest, at every part of the year, is lush, green, and dense. But every summertime, it turns into a dried up, dead, and sparse woodland. This here is usually a trickling creek, but now it's a dried up pathway of clay. Even the bamboo has shed its leaves to self-preserve amidst the heat. In the same way that winter is the dead season in temperate regions, where I'm from, the summers are the most unfavorable time for life. It hadn't rained in my area for what has seemed like months now, but I knew the rainy season was just a few weeks away, and with it would come cooler temperatures again in the ant room. The ant room is actually equipped with climate control, and I could very easily set the ant room to be at any stable temperature I want. But I haven't been doing this, because this would be just me affecting the ecosystem in a way that didn't follow the natural flow of the seasons. And I wanted to see how the seasons affected things. So far, I've noticed that some of our asparagus ferns have dried up, the mosses weren't as abundant, and a lot of the animals have gone into estivation, hiding deep underground to escape the heat, while others, like our once abundant crickets, have stopped breeding altogether. and have since disappeared from our rainforest. This was a concern because a lot of our predators depended on the continuous swarms of crickets for food. And so, as a temporary solution to the heat, I decided to add a new generation of crickets. Sadly, due to the heat, some crickets had died during transport, but the crickets that did survive immediately began to integrate into Pandora. They swept across the forest floor and began munching on vegetation, ferns, dead mosses, and decaying materials. With the crickets being absent in the rainforest for some time, the plants had greatly overgrown, so I was happy to see them doing their great work at feeding on the veg. Gravid females immediately began to lay their eggs into the soft soils. But as for the dead crickets, the stench of the carcasses brought some other creatures out of hiding. Roaches. Just like we saw in Gomantong, the roaches had come to do their handy work and feast. They were not about to allow these decaying crickets to go to waste, nor allow the soil creatures to take them. Gnome ants also appeared on the scene to feed on the crickets, but it looked like they were going to wait to simply collect the leftover body parts discarded by the roaches. The roaches themselves were so savage as they devoured the dead crickets cum gusto. Some roaches were so eager, they began to squabble and fight over the dead crickets, like hungry, flesh-drunken hyenas over wildebeest cadavers. What a sight to behold! In the night, the female crickets continued to lay their eggs into the soft, fertile soils of Pandora. I was happy to know this ensured a future generation of crickets to come. But this was just a temporary solution that still didn't address the main problem, the heat, which was affecting the crickets' breeding cycles. This is what I mean when I said having a cooler cave vivarium attached to Pandora would prove to be a well-needed refugium for the crickets. Suddenly, I spotted someone emerging for the hunt. In the shadows, behind the rock wall, I spotted Lady Deathstrike, a huntsman spider that I recently discovered was not dead like I had initially thought. But that's one long and crazy story I covered in the last episode. She sat still over the waters of our Blackwater pond, in which the guppies were swimming around, feeding on suspended edibles in the waters. Now, speaking of Blackwater, it's time to cover the next possible biome for our giant vivarium. Continuing on our trek in Borneo, I embarked on a private guided trip through the swamps of the Kinabatangan River. Let me tell you, this was probably one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life because these waters were apparently infested with crocodiles. Why our boat was so close to the water, I don't know. But anyway, I immediately noticed the lush jungle was literally growing on all sides of the river, inside the water, which by the way was super murky, kind of like Pandora's Aqua Noctis. Check out the sounds of this Bornean swamp. We spotted long-tailed macaque monkeys in the trees. And check out how beautiful this new morning sun looked across the waters. For a while, I almost forgot there were crocs in these waters and sat back to enjoy the swampy ambiance. Come enjoy it with me. Eventually, a huge mist covered the river, which apparently made things a bit dangerous for us. So we turned on the motor and moved on to another location. That was when we turned into an inlet, which suddenly made me feel like we were in prehistoric times. It was literally like we had entered Jurassic Park, and it was super spooky. The whole time, I made sure to look around us for crocs. We were also told that this was the elusive pygmy elephant territory, and spotting them was like spotting a unicorn. So I looked out for them as well. But suddenly, we hit a clogging of dead leaves and branches, and my heart began to race. Somehow I felt getting stuck made us an easy target for giant crocodiles, and it worried me greatly. Eventually, we managed to push through the clogging and entered the most incredible inlet, where once again, there was this amazing degree of tranquility and a hybrid feeling of eerie placidity that was both calming and spooky all at once. I studied the landscape and assessed how I might be able to replicate such an awesome environment like this in a giant vivarium. I asked to look at the floating plant life, and I spotted massive floating islands of hyacinth and moss. Some of these floating islands were pretty thick and were ideal habitat for amphibians, like these cool frogs. Heading back, I was sad that the team and I didn't spot any pygmy elephants on this day, but I was kind of glad we didn't spot any crocs, as some guy had apparently lost an arm the week before while doing his laundry in the river. I was quite happy to head back to our camp. So let's talk about swamps. I've had lots of experience with creating aquatic systems in the past, but I knew if we chose to do something that was largely aquatic, it would require above average maintenance, i.e. filters, possibly fertilizers and CO2 canisters, which is kind of against the concept of creating an ecosystem. But even in a massive tank, it still isn't enough space to create the self-regulating conditions of a wild swamp. In the wild, for instance, naturally dissolved CO2, which is needed by the aquatic plants, comes from ancient decayed vegetation deep in the ground. There was no way to provide such a system in a tank, other than through CO2 canisters. Plus, an entire swamp is essentially its own filter, which in a tank would have to be substituted by way of an actual external filter, or sump, plus water changes, especially when adding aquatic animals. So maintenance and human interference in a swamp vivarium would be quite high. Let's talk creatures. Obviously, not many ants can survive in this swamp environment. So no ants, nor can it really act as a refugium for terrestrial prey insects. A swamp ecosystem would be mostly fish, aquatic snails, aquatic insects, pretty much the things in Aqua Noctis now, and perhaps, just like in the Kinabatangan River, crocodilians. Guys, this is a dwarf caiman, and though they're called dwarf, make no mistake, there is nothing dwarf about them, as they grow up to 5 or 6 feet in length at full size. But as a baby, a dwarf caiman could be housed in our swamp ecosystem. They grow about 4 or 5 inches per year, which means we could house a baby caiman for a while in the vivarium before it would need to be relocated to my 60-foot outdoor pond and sunken garden. One thing to consider though is that a caiman feeds on insects, fish, amphibians, and anything else it can fit into its mouth. It's actually considered to be what is called a keystone species, which means it has a disproportionately large effect on its natural environment relative to its abundance. And in the case of our vivarium, it would mean that no other creature would be able to share the tank with it for very long. Maybe some fish that it deems too small to eat, and perhaps some snails. but it would pretty much gobble up any frog, newt, or fish large enough to eat. If ever, Pandora might act as a refugium for the caiman's prey. But if we didn't house a dwarf caiman, we could possibly go with aquaphilic lizards, like Chinese water dragons, which are super cute, aquatic snakes that prey on fish and frogs, or even turtles as an alternative. Oh, and by the way, a snapping turtle is pretty much in the same boat as a caiman, I'm afraid. So what do you guys think about a swamp ecosystem vivarium? I spotted Smog and Daenerys, our two sunskinks basking together atop the rock wall. I watched as Smog descended into the lowlands to hunt for the new crickets that had been released into Pandora. Daenerys watched quietly from above. Unlike much of the other hibernating Pandoran creatures, these sunskinks loved the heat. In fact, their species was pretty versatile, inhabiting both montane cloud rainforests like Pandora, as well as the hotter lowland rainforests, which bring me now to our third possible biome for Vivarium. Exploring the lowland rainforests of Borneo was something I was excited about, again because it was an ancient natural space, 140 million years old ancient, making the lowland Bornean rainforest one of the oldest in the world. The lowland Bornean rainforest is home to over 15,000 species of flowering plants, 3,000 species of trees, 221 species of terrestrial animals, and 420 species of birds. But the forest was full of danger. Check out this Nibong palm tree, covered in spikes that, if spiked, cause a human to go numb, and the only way to heal from it is through surgery. I had to be careful in these unfriendly wild forests. I immediately spotted sunskinks in the leaf litter. Little smogs and dens running around. The insects were mind-blowing. There were a ton of ants, including this giant forest ant. Look at how huge it was. On a tree, these cool lantern bugs were hanging out, trying to blend in. We also came across this cool trail of termites, swarming in broad daylight. At first I thought the termites were foraging for food, but as I looked closer, they were carrying little babies, which probably meant they were relocating nests, or perhaps a nomadic species of termite. I didn't know. We used a blacklight to spot a huge forest scorpion hiding in a log. In this murky pond, I spotted a mudskipper trying to hide from my camera. The forest was also full of mushrooms for days. Now this was super cool. Looking into this telescope, I spotted the entrance to a hive of stingless bees. Yup, bees that lack a stinger. In Southeast Asia and parts of South America, there exist species of bees that don't have stingers, and to me seem more like flying ants. I actually just installed a few stingless beehives this week on my own property for the pollination of my fruits and veggies, but also for their delicious honey. The locals allowed me to sample the honey harvested from these stingless bees, and I find tastes tangy and is more syrupy than traditional honeybee honey. The stingless bees themselves are top pollinators in the rainforests in which they live. I've been flirting with the idea of adding a stingless beehive into a vivarium, but it would necessarily mean we would need to connect a tube from the vivarium to the outside of my home for the bees to forage. In the rainforest, we also spotted a variety of neat agamid lizards, a ton of snakes like this tree viper. We also ran into this huge water monitor, hi buddy, and came across some very interesting mammals, like this flying lemur and this sun bear. But perhaps the most interesting encounter in the Bornean lowland rainforest were these. Orangutan. I literally froze and hid in a little corner when I spotted this fellow moving around in the branches. But our tour guide mentioned that the orangutan here don't really fear people, which was interesting. In fact, along our trail, we spotted this fellow munching nonchalantly on some fruit. I thought based on its appearance that it was a female, But apparently it was a male, just not an alpha male, which grows that signature huge alpha face we all know that results from alpha hormones. It was unreal to be just a few steps away from such an incredible animal, but I didn't even see it as an animal because it was so human-like. And then the unthinkable. The orangutan crawled down and headed our way. And our guide told our caravan to just remain calm and stand back. What a crazy experience! Orangutans, the world's largest arboreal animals, which were at one point widespread throughout Southeast Asia and China, were now critically endangered, only found on 2 islands of Sumatra and Borneo. Their decline in numbers have been due to a drastic loss of habitat. I truly hoped local conservation efforts would eventually help the orangutan populations bounce back because there were such beautiful great apes. Primates were chilling everywhere, including this male proboscis monkey, named after its huge nose. Cool, right? So if we were to recreate a lowland rainforest, I think it would be essentially like a warmer and less humid Pandora, less mosses, and more plant life, and more flora and fauna that prefer warmer and drier conditions. Now, one idea that I've been contemplating is the incorporation of primates. A breeder of marmosets, a type of tiny monkey, has been offering a pair to me. These marmosets are not wild-caught, but are captive-bred pets, and I've been researching their care for years now. The minimum enclosure size requirement for a pair of marmosets is allegedly 6 feet tall by 3 feet deep by 6 feet wide. This already means that Pandora is larger than the minimum required space for a pair of marmosets. But you guys already know, we don't do minimum here on this channel. Behold, my giant 3-story aviary, which currently houses a variety of songbirds, and the space is naturally landscaped with trees, vines, and branches. So one option I could do is house a pair of marmosets in my giant 3-story home aviary, full-time, and on the days I film, release them for playtime into our vivarium. Kind of like an ecosystem event, where a pair of marmosets descend into our plot of lowland rainforest to interact with the ecosystem and do their thing. This of course would require me to tame the marmosets to come down to me when it's time for vivarium playtime. We'll see. Primates are an important player in ecosystems as they're significant frugivores, which means they eat fruit and thereby assist in the distribution of seeds of plants and trees. They also eat plenty of insects and small creatures, and I think it might be interesting to learn more about them. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. The vines of Pandora have begun to bloom so beautifully, and the stunning look of their dainty buds and tendrils made the canopy of Pandora look awesome. It was then that I spotted a movement in the canopy's ferns. It was a carpenter ant. Awesome! The carpenter ants, which usually forage at night, had decided to wake up early to forage the canopy for food. The carpenter ants were on a very special mission here. They were licking up sweet honeydew extruded by the mealybugs, which were squirting it everywhere. It's no wonder in Australia, these ants are known as sugar ants, as they definitely have a sweet tooth. Carpenter ants belong to a very widespread and diverse genus of ant called Camponotus, and these ants here are a species of tropical carpenter ant that I introduced into Pandora some time ago. I was happy to see them still around and doing well. It seems these carpenter ants have formed a truce with the usually war-thirsty acrobat ants, the chromatoblasters, which were also foraging the ferns for the exact same reason. I was also quite happy and amazed to see how much life and action was going on in the Pandoran canopy. Which brings me now to our 4th biome. From the lowland rainforest, we climbed a cool set of stairs to this awesome walkway up high in the rainforest canopy. And you would think that there wouldn't be as much action up here, but I was surprised by some of the creatures we spotted up in the treetops. First of all, the craziest massive leaves were all around us. We spotted some wild figs. Yes, the fruit found on charcuterie boards paired with wine. I spotted some cool ants, like the spiny ant. And check this out. A giant centipede that at first I found cool, but it suddenly jumped at my face. And thus was born a newfound personal phobia of centipedes. There were a ton of spiders up here, including this beautiful jumping spider. And this, which looks like an ant, but is actually a beetle, mimicking an ant. Spending time up in the canopy got my imagination going. Imagine if we could cut an opening along the top of Pandora and then create a glass bridge up through that glass floor piece, which would be removed, ascending up to the second floor of the ant room, into a large vivarium with a variety of bonsai trees or shrubs with broad leaves or that bear fruit. Our vines and branches could wind up the glass bridge from Pandora to this upper canopy vivarium, where creatures, and perhaps even marmosets, could enjoy being in the treetops. It would also act as a refugium for some insects, like our late Stanley, the bush cricket, or our late green reaper, the praying mantis, both of whom I still suspect were killed by our male sunskink Smaug. A canopy vivarium would create an effective safe space from our mostly ground-dwelling reptilian apex predators. Possible fauna we could house in a canopy vivarium are some of my favorite ants, weaver ants, which create their awesome leaf basket nests in trees using silk produced by their larvae. I believe weaver ants would do amazing in a treetop canopy vivarium and would simply descend into Pandora to forage. Another creature I've been thinking of incorporating is a dormouse, known in the pet trade as a micro squirrel. These arboreal rodents might also be a neat addition as they forage the treetops and grounds for seeds, nuts, grains, fruit, insects, and other such edibles. They form nests up high in trees, which would be super neat to observe in a canopy vivarium. So what do you guys think of a canopy ecosystem vivarium? The death of Rocksteady, our late male rhino beetle, was a sad loss for those of us following Pandora's story. But I promised that I had a surprise for you guys. And here they were. 1, 2, and 3. The hot season had caused an abundance of these coconut rhino beetles in my area, a different species from what Rocksteady was, with smaller horns and a more indented exoskeleton. But all 3 coconut rhino beetles that I managed to find were males. I was still in the process of looking for a female, so we could really appreciate their rhino beetle behaviors and hopefully catch the males wrestling for territory and breeding rights. The rhino beetles immediately took to ground and burrowed. Though nobody could replace our Rocksteady, these coconut rhino beetles were an interesting new addition to our rainforest. But as I looked towards the back of Pandora, I noticed a large grass plant had sprung out from the ground. I was pretty sure this was from one of the seeds collected when the Terra Raiders, our marauder ants, were still around. They have since disappeared from our rainforest due to either the heat or mites. But speaking of grasses, this brings me now to our 5th and final possible biome for an ecosystem vivarium. I believe most of us have been to some kind of grassland or open field and know what it's like. It's full of tons of life, including reptiles like snakes, lizards, and even tortoises, amphibians, mammals like moles, and rodents, as well as insects. I flew to Sydney, Australia a while back and checked out one of my all-time favorite ants, bull ants, on which I did a video on this channel. I think a grassland vivarium would be totally unique as far as ants go, and I know a ton of local ant species that would love an open grassy field vivarium, including our Meranopus bicolor colony, which by the way is still doing well. It would also act as an incredible refugium for grasshoppers and crickets. The only challenge I have regarding this option is that such a vivarium requires a ton of light. Most grasses require full sunlight, and that is generally hard to mimic in captivity. I would also need to continually keep planting new grasses as the mature ones were eaten. though challenging, a grassy plains vivarium might prove to be quite neat and insightful. And so, these are the 5 possible vivarium ideas for our next ecosystem. It will be a few months still before we actually build and launch our second vivarium. But what I need to know at this stage is which of the 5 vivariums you feel will be the most beneficial to learning and insights on the natural world. Cave, swamp, lowland rainforest, canopy, or grassland. I feel for a better understanding of our 1,000-gallon plot of cloud rainforest of Pandora, we must also understand its relationship to adjacent ecosystems, where flora and fauna can migrate to, seek refuge, and/or establish new populations if needed. A second vivarium expansion is our inevitable next logical step. Now, if you're watching these videos from a television, which by the way, I believe to be the best way to enjoy these videos, when you get a chance, please kindly hop onto your mobile or desktop and visit the Community tab on my YouTube page to vote for your favorite biome option for our second giant ecosystem vivarium. I have a couple polls there for me to pick your brains and help me decide on the future course of our hugely important biological project. Currently, cave seems to be the leading vote, but that's only based on over 100,000 votes. If each of you watching casts your vote in the polls, the results can still be changed significantly. So let me know what you think in the votes. Do also let me know your opinions in the comments of this video and upvote those comments you agree with so I see them. It will help me with my final decision as to which biome we ultimately choose to go with. Thank you all for being a part of this exciting biological journey of discovery and ongoing story of our giant cloud rainforest of Pandora.